Planning is one thing, but actually doing, that's where accountability comes. That's where the real skill gaps are exposed. And at that point, emotionally, like we said before, sometimes there is panic. There is panic to not continue doing what we know how to do, how we do it, because it has some time work. And then there is like this promise of optimization or modernization or
Yeah.
something that is a maybe versus something that we know for certain is going to work.
Hey, Edra. Thanks for joining me to talk about activity versus progress today as it relates to digital transformation. I hear a lot of buzz on the sales side about wanting to get into digital transformation or automation or modernization. And I think there's a lot of fear and anxiety about what that means and how to move from planning to implementation. And so I want to talk through that with you today. I know that, from an operations perspective, there's a lot of experience in going from strategy to execution and pausing and not knowing exactly where to go. And so I would love to hear from your perspective in product operations. What do you think actually causes teams to hesitate when it comes to execution? How are you seeing that from our team internally, but also the client and how they are reacting to progress versus just activity?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here today. Um, it's a lot of fun. So when it comes to some reasons why teams are hesitant or scared about starting these initiatives, I think that mainly is because of habits and inertia. It is very difficult when there is a workflow or a system or a process that is working. Maybe it's not optimized or maybe it's not perfect, but it's working and people know how to use it and they are comfortable with that situation. So breaking that inertia and changing things in general as a whole is complicated and it takes a lot. So again, a working or a functional workflow, you go like, why should we change it? Or is it going to be worse if we change? So I think that is one of the factors, and another one is also like a very human thing that happens. That is, there is sometimes a lack of confidence in the skills or capabilities of the team to be able to adopt those changes. So I would say those factors take a big place in all of this. And I also think that sometimes there is also some fear because they have tried some initiatives before and maybe they didn't work or they didn't go as they should have gone. And then there is like a fear to try again.
Yeah. How does it actually show up in the execution phase? Once teams start execution or implementing, what they've planned for, because we see a lot of times that when clients come to us, they've started an engagement, they thought they had everything, planned out really well, and then things either stall or they just take a really long time, way longer than expected. How does that show up in terms of the actual execution stage of any kind of project or initiative like this?
In my experience, sometimes planning isn't taken as seriously as it
Yeah.
should. And sometimes, even if we're spending some time for planning and for preparing and all of that, people, stakeholders, the team is so busy that they don't really, they do it because they've been told that they need to do this planning
Yeah.
because something else is going to happen. But not we don't pay that much attention. We don't go into the details. Some of the decisions aren't made. And when it comes to execute is when we see, There is a little bit of panic because we don't have the requirements really fleshed out. There are some things that haven't been really worked out how they are going to be. And we feel that we need that perfectly planned initiative or exercise or project that we don't have. So that sometimes takes to misunderstandings and wanting to replan and just claiming that we're not ready and that kind of thing.
Yeah. You had mentioned this a little bit ago, but just the confidence that I think a lot of teams or leadership start out feeling really confident about what they're doing. And then they get into the weeds and they realize that maybe there are dependencies that they weren't aware of, or the complexities of the tech stack weren't fully understood, or, whatever that might be. And so it creates a fear that results in, they just kind of freeze instead of having the skill set or the discipline to work through those types of issues. And so there's an emotional connection, I think, with the excitement of something new and something better and something different, something innovative. And then once you get into the execution phase, things maybe aren't as rosy as you initially thought that they would be, or as easy. And so what brings about that shift from excitement to dread,
There is, yeah,
and being able to make changes without that?
totally. Like a typical one would be the requirements are too high level. Like when we were planning, we talked about the requirements, but just in a general level. But now that
Yeah.
we need to execute, is like, but this is not clear enough. This is not.
Mhm. Yeah. So that's a really important topic to talk about just when it comes to planning and strategy. And we've done lots of strategies with clients from the startup side all the way through to mid market. And we do get a lot of hesitance around strategy, and people do want to move directly into execution. And we've been really strong about making a push to the strategy side of things, because strategy isn't just planning a roadmap. It's understanding your market, it's understanding your business objectives, it's making sure that, features aren't necessarily all you're planning around. It's how are you going to take your current workflows, improve them, automate them, um, implement some kind of AI to, improve efficiencies and reduce costs. And there's so much more to strategy than just planning a list of features or functionality. And so what we do see is once all of that strategy has been defined and agreed upon from a stakeholder perspective, there's still fear of execution. And I know that cost is a big part of that. I know that most of the time companies are just nervous about spending the money. And I'm curious what your thoughts are too on just why is it that companies, teams will go through the process and then hold after strategy before execution?
I think there is like an important emotional component to all of this. Planning is one thing, but actually doing, that's where accountability comes. That's where the real skill gaps are exposed. And at that point, emotionally, like we said before, sometimes there is panic. There is panic to not continue doing what we know how to do and how we do it because it has some time work. And then there is like this promise of optimization or modernization or
Yeah.
something that is a maybe versus something that we know for certain is going to work. So I think that component is important. I think at that point the processes are questioned. The new processes are that we are trying to implement are questioned. There is a real fear then for or uncertainty about deadlines and budget. Are we able to do this? Are we able to make these deadlines and this hit these milestones with the budget that we have? Did we misplan and all that kind of thing? I think that's really what is behind all of this.
How do you think we can prevent that? How do you think companies can feel more comfortable moving from strategy to execution, and where they feel like they can kind of de-risk the execution phase? and then reduce friction along the way?
Part of it is to just understanding really well and since day one what the goals are and break down into smaller goals so that we have sometimes what we see in a lot of companies is that there are a lot of problems and sometimes for big companies different department things are not connected, there is no integration, and we want to tackle many problems at a time. And then we start an initiative that is probably too broad. So I think one of the keys is to narrow down different projects for different to solve different problems and have smaller scope projects for all of this. I think defining success criteria is also key. Like what is needed so that this initiative is a success and having clear indicators. I'm not only talking about KPIs, but just really understand what needs to happen so that this project has a good outcome. So if we have smaller projects, we have clear success criteria, we have a very clear decision-making process that is key. This we run into this all the time. Sometimes we have a product owner or we have a person who is in charge of the project, but then you have too many stakeholders who have a say in key decisions, and it is unclear how things get prioritized, or there are those dependencies you were talking about before. Like for this part, it would be better to make this move, but then it's going to be a dependency or an impact on this other part, and therefore we can't do it, or we have to wait until two, three, four different people, different department, different groups are aligned. So I think at the very beginning, we have to scope things smaller. We can't expect miracles. Like not everything is gonna fit at once. We have to do it step by step. We need to understand clearly who is making the decisions and what is the escalation path if things don't go as expected. If we do that and we have communication is another key, like continuous checkpoints, feedback loops, understanding where we are, understanding how we are making progress and approaching our goals or getting derailed, um, that would definitely reduce the risk in any project.
Yeah, I agree. I think that starting small, and I recently talked about boiling the ocean or eating a whole elephant or whatever, all the different analogies that there are. But it's true. I think that we try to do too much too
Yeah,
fast.
yeah,
And the reality is that success comes from the quick wins, the ability to see progress quickly. People want instant gratification. They don't wanna wait for, a year, 2 year, 3 years for, something to improve. They want something now, and I think, getting to minimal wins fast, that's so
yeah.
much more
People are
effective.
always, and everybody's too busy with the day to
Yeah,
day.
yeah,
So whenever you're going to take any change, and this applies to projects or general life, if you want to change something, you need to devote some time for that. We always start our projects telling the different stakeholders, like during kickoff or in the initial stages of the project, we tell them how much time we're going to need from them.
yeah,
And I think that is very important. Like if you're not going to have the time to really pay attention to what you want to do, it's better to wait until you have that availability.
yeah, yeah, and it's also getting the actual users, the people who are going to be benefiting from any of these new systems or processes and, getting them involved and hearing truly what their pain points are. I think it's a bottom-up approach where we've gotta hear from the teams within the different business units. What are you dealing with? Where are your handoffs? Where is all of your manual work? Where's a lot of repetitive activity? Where can we focus in on improving that technology to make your life easier? And I think it's all about finding pockets within operations or other functions within the business. It's finding those pockets of opportunity for improvement. So where can you save 10% of your time each week? Just, 4 hours of time each week. Let's start there. Let's figure out how we can automate something within that function. And it's really just small bits and pieces, these little micro functions within the business to build on and compound the efficiency that you create. But yeah, or we have gone in and changed an entire division within a company from very, very manual processes. Literally, people having to walk to each other's desks to hand them a printout, which is
Yeah.
wild to me. And
Yeah.
we've automated a lot of that with AI. It can happen. Luckily, the client that we worked with to do that was very eager. He had a big vision. He was super excited about making these big changes in his industry. And so he was ready. But I think a lot of the times companies feel the pressure from the market. They feel pressure to um, keep up at minimum, let alone be innovative. And so a lot of times the pressure is there, but the real desire isn't. They don't want to disrupt the business, and they know they need to, but they don't want to. We see a lot of that in industry and, manufacturing, distribution, construction, some of those industries where it just has been a certain way for so long,
Yeah.
um, and leadership just doesn't want to make a change.
Another very interesting point I find is like sometimes when trying to avoid risk, like you create more risk
Oh yeah,
because there are things that just it's like I call it patching. Like you try to avoid something and then you apply a patch and then the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
right. Yeah, your technical debt is just growing and growing and growing, and your legacy systems become fragile and fractured. And yeah, there's so much more long-term cost to be concerned about with that kind of
Yeah.
perspective than,
Yeah.
you know,
Manual workarounds, like we have this process that we do. Half of it is,
yeah,
automatic, and then the other half we just and it is normalized that we're
yeah,
doing it manually. So there are so many exceptions. When we try to do an audit of different processes for different companies, we just find all kind of things that they don't even know because
yeah,
they normalized it. They don't even know that that is like a glitch in the process or something.
yeah,
Very
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, it is. I think there's overlap within operations within a business where somebody may be having a problem that they think is only their problem. And then when you start digging in, you start to realize that it's the same problem across the company, just in different, divisions or aspects of the business. And you start to see where just one simple upgrade or automation could solve a problem for so many people. And so the team that's actually doing the work, they're just kind of in their day to day and they're not talking to other people within the company that could be experiencing the same issues. And so that gets really tricky, but that's where consultancies like us can come in and talk to everybody and figure out where the overlap is, figure out where the gaps are, and kind of put all of that together to create a more meaningful plan. And I think it would be surprising to a lot of leadership where there is a lot of overlap in manual work and efficiency. Um, to be able to see where that is and how it's really affecting the business, because some people just don't speak up or um, they just, you're at risk of burnout because they're not speaking up. They don't think there will be a change. And so there's burnout, there's frustration, there's turnover, or customers are churning because they're not getting the quality that they're looking for. And so, yeah, there's a lot of impact to what could be just a really simple problem to solve. And it's just uncovering all of that.
We often find lack of structure as a root cause for a bunch of
Yeah.
issues. We go in and there is friction initially because sometimes the teams feel like they are going to be policed or something,
Mhm.
or have been able to show after a while working with these teams that is the other way around. It
Yeah.
is like providing structure and governance and processes and predictability, and it protects the teams because most of the times people don't fail because they want to, but because they are not sure what needs to be done
Right.
and how it needs to be done, or where is the limit, or where do I overlap with my neighbor team, or I change this process because this is not well thought, and I need to do something to figure out what the process is missing or lacking.
I'm curious from a operations perspective, what are some practical things that, if a team is working on digital transformation or modernization internally, they're not using a consultancy and they have an internal team and they want to be able to make these small changes and shifts. What are some things that they can do operationally to move the needle and see how positive change can come?
I think the first thing to ensure is leadership support. I
Mhm.
think any real transformation or change needs to be supported top down. So the main stakeholders need to be aligned and the leadership needs to be supporting this. And like I said before, the leadership team is dedicating the time in case of escalations or decisions needed to be made or something. We are going to have that backup and that support. I think that is key. It's not easy sometimes. It's not very practical, and it's out of the control of sometimes the project leader, but it is something to fight for. Then I always think that we need to set realistic timelines because we need to when we have a realistic plan, then it is easy to execute. You know what you need to do, like on a weekly basis. And if you deviate, you know the time you have to go back on track, or you know that action needs to be taken immediately. The timelines need to be realistic. All the
And there's give
stakeholders.
and take, right? Like sometimes it's, you think your timeline is solid and then something pops up and where's the give and take gonna happen?
Saying it has to be like the most optimized plan. Like whenever we do any planning, we know where we need to add some buffer and we know where we can probably make some time. But you need to have a realistic one. And you know the team you're working with, you know which are the main difficulties and issues and potential problems in the project. So you just have to be realistic. I think that is that leadership support, realistic timelines, a realistic budget, and also, again, I love and we also work well, we work with a mixture of different methodologies, but I love the idea of iterating. And that is why I think all our frameworks that we combine in our own methodology like worked it so well that we don't expect to get it all perfect. You need to have the confidence that you're going to be iterating and that you're going to be learning from mistakes and that you are going to have multiple chances. Learning is not failing, it's just an opportunity to do things better day after day. So I think this is probably doesn't sound super practical, but it is. Like once you know that you have to have your realistic timelines, that you know that you need to stick to your budget, that you can iterate, and that is built in your budget and your timeline and you have the support and the communication with all the stakeholders, things typically go well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I love so much about how we've, you know, created and implemented this hybrid agile framework where we use the tried and true agile framework, but we do adapt and we are flexible and we understand that, business needs change. It's
Yeah.
just it's being ready for that. It's expecting it to happen and not being caught off guard by it. And just having the right mechanisms in place to be able to handle that. Change control is a huge part still. And also, that doesn't mean that planning up front is not important. And that I think a lot of, especially in the startup space, we don't see it as much in our mid market client base, but especially in the startup space. And a lot of times, just to caveat this, they are starting out, they're bootstrapping. It's super scrappy, and that's totally acceptable. But I think they tend to get stuck in this real scrappy, we're just going to figure it out as we go process instead of having a maturing product process. And then it's really hard to get the product to scale because they're just not planning the way they should. So, I think there's a big strategic component that feels like it's really heavy overhead. It's expensive because you're working with skilled, disciplined analysts and strategists, but the outcome from that, initial investment at the beginning is so much more valuable in the long run, reducing rework later and making sure that you're uncovering risk and you're mitigating that risk. You're planning for things to go wrong and you're planning for things to change and to shift and how you're going to, position all of that within your execution phase. So having all of that up front, even though it seems like maybe it's not fully necessary, but it is. It's so necessary. And that's, I think, what helps you get to those realistic timelines because you know what's coming. And that, that's part of the process that should never be ignored, right?
Yeah, we get that question sometimes, and it's a very valid question. Like, why do we want to spend in strategy and all of that if then you're gonna go into this framework where you can change and iterate
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
so, and it's not overhead, it's some kind of insurance because you are defining initially the umbrella of where you can move. Like you can go from here to here, but you're clear about what the end strategy, the end
Yeah.
goals are. And
Yeah.
that is exactly, you're totally right. That is exactly what allows you to then plan the project correctly and know those guardrails that we were talking about before.
Yeah. It's super interesting how things have shifted in the market. This has become such a huge topic, and companies know they need to modernize and they need to improve operational efficiencies and reduce costs. And there's all of these things happening. And we're seeing a lot of different perspectives. It's funny, just yesterday, talking with two different customers and them having completely different perspectives on they're trying to do the same things and thinking of them totally differently. I think it's really important that we're showing up for them and, listening and helping companies to actually achieve these really big things to improve their business and help them save money and to do all the things. So thank you so much for chatting with me today. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be in touch again to do another fun video.
Perfect.